Welcome to Threads of Truth, where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. It was a spring morning back in 1999. Sunny day in London seemed completely ordinary.
Just a normal Monday, really. April 26th.
And then the news broke. News that it sent shockwaves across the entire United Kingdom.
Their disbelief, really.
We're talking about the murder of Jill Dando. For anyone who maybe doesn't remember or wasn't in the UK then, she was huge.
Oh, absolutely. One of the most recognizable faces on British television. The BBC's sort of golden girl, as they call her.
Right? Incredibly popular, trusted, presenting the news, holiday programs, and critically, as we'll get into, Crime Watch.
And she was, seemingly at the peak of her career, personally happy, engaged to be married later that year.
And then, just like that, broad daylight, on the doorstep of her own home in Fulham.
Shot. Once. An assassination, really. That's how the police described it almost immediately. Precise, professional, chillingly effective.
The shock wasn't just that she was killed, but how? So brazen, so inexplicable. Who would want to kill Jill Dando, and why like that?
That became the central question, didn't it? The absolute enigma. There was no obvious reason, no immediate suspect that made sense.
And it's a question that, honestly, still hangs heavy today, more than 2 decades later, officially unsolved.
Despite a massive police investigation, a really controversial conviction that was later overturned, the core mystery remains.
So today, we're going to explore this enduring mystery. We'll unpack the facts as we know them, look closely at that investigation, the flaws, the controversy,
And then delve into the theories because, there are many. Some plausible, some, less so. Fed by that lack of a clear answer.
Exactly. It's a case that shows how one event could just spiral into this complex tangle of speculation, grief, and unanswered questions. We'll try to untangle some of those threads.
It really does defy easy explanation, and I think that dissonance is key. You had this incredibly popular, admired public figure.
Someone seen as very safe, very trustworthy.
Precisely. And then this incredibly brutal, almost clinical act of violence against her. No scandal surrounding her, no known enemies in the usual sense.
Nothing in her public or known private life seemed to point towards this kind of danger.
Absolutely nothing. Which meant the nature of her death felt so jarring, so out of place, it immediately pushed people towards thinking it had to be something external, something professional, or something deeply hidden.
Or just completely random, though that theory has its own problems.
It does, but that lack of an obvious, immediate motive that was the vacuum. And into that vacuum rushed an extraordinary amount of speculation.
So let's start there. For listeners who might not be as familiar, tell us a bit more about Jill Dando. What defined her public image?
Well, Jill Dando was 37 when she died. She'd built a really successful career in journalism and broadcasting, primarily with the BBC. She started in regional newspapers actually, then moved into television.
And by 1999, she was everywhere, wasn't she? A household name.
Definitely. She presented the BBC's breakfast news, the 6 o'clock news, the travel show Holiday. She had this way of connecting with the audience, warm, but also authoritative and professional. Very reassuring presence.
And then there was Crime Watch. That feels particularly significant in this context.
It really does. Crime Watch UK. She co-presented it from 1995. It was a hugely popular show, quite groundbreaking for its time.
Because it directly involved the public in solving crimes.
Yeah.
Reconstructions, appeals for information.
Exactly. They'd reconstruct unsolved crimes, often quite serious ones, and appeal directly to viewers watching at home, asking them to call in with any information. And it worked. The show led to quite a few arrests and convictions over the years.
So her role there wasn't just reading headlines. She was actively involved in the narrative of crime and justice.
Very much so. She'd interview police officers, sometimes victims' families, always with this air of empathy, composure, real dignity. It made her incredibly trusted.
The Golden Girl label really stuck. People genuinely liked her.
They did. She seemed very down to earth, very approachable, despite her fame. Completely removed from any kind of celebrity scandal or controversy.
And her personal life seemed settled too.
As far as anyone knew, yes. She was engaged to Dr. Alan Farthing, a respected gynecologist. They were planning their wedding for September of that year, 1999.
So no obvious personal turmoil, no messy relationships in the background that might offer a motive.
None that ever came to light. And the police looked, believe me, they scrutinized her personal life intensely. That lack of any internal conflict, personal or financial, just made the external execution style nature of the killing even more baffling. It cemented that feeling of an impossible crime.
Okay, so let's turn to that day itself, April 26, 1999. Walk us through the timeline, the chilling details of what happened that morning.
Right. So Jill had actually spent the night at her fiancé Alan Farthing's house in Chiswick. But that morning, she decided to drive back to her own house at 29 Gowan Avenue in Fulham, West London,
Why was she going back there?
just to pick up some posts, maybe some clothes, run a few errands. It was meant to be a brief visit. She'd recently put the house up for sale, actually, as she planned to move in with Farthing after the wedding.
Okay, so she arrives at Gowan Avenue.
Around 11:30 a.m., broad daylight, mid-morning on a residential street. People would have been around, potentially.
And what happened as she got to her front door?
The details are horrifyingly clinical. As she reached her front door, presumably getting her keys out, someone approached her from behind,
Grabbed her.
seems like it, held her, possibly forced her head down slightly, and then fired a single shot.
Just one shot.
Yes, from a semi-automatic pistol. The pathologist later determined the muzzle of the gun was pressed firmly against her left temple when it was fired.
Pressed against her head. That suggests intent, control.
Exactly. It screams execution style, no hesitation, no struggle reported by witnesses who heard the single muffled sound. It wasn't a robbery. Her keys, her handbag, her jewelry were all untouched. It was purely about ending her life, quickly and efficiently.
And the weapon itself?
Vanished. Completely. Despite exhaustive searches of the area, drains, bins, gardens, the 9mm semi-automatic pistol used was never, ever found. That's a huge missing piece of the puzzle.
We found her.
A neighbor, Helen Doble, discovered her body about 14 minutes later, around 11:47 a.m. She saw Jill slumped on the doorstep in a pool of blood and immediately called 999.
Paramedics arrived quickly.
They did, and rushed her to Charing Cross Hospital nearby, but the injury was catastrophic. She was pronounced dead on arrival shortly after 1 p.m.
The shock must have been instantaneous across the country as the news spread.
Immense. Immediate and profound. Her face was on the lunchtime news bulletins that very day. It wasn't just a murder. It felt like an attack on someone everyone knew, someone they trusted. The brazenness of it, daylight, doorstep added to the terror and disbelief. That image, the Golden Girl killed so brutally, became seared into the public consciousness.
A professional hit, daylight, famous victim, no clear motive, missing weapon. For the police arriving on scene, this must have been overwhelming.
Utterly. The Metropolitan Police launched Operation Oxborough almost immediately. It quickly became one of the largest, most complex, and ultimately most frustrating murder hunts in modern British history.
What kind of skill are we talking about?
Huge resources were poured in, hundreds of officers at its peak. They interviewed over 2,500 people initially, eventually taking something like 8,000 statements over the course of the investigation. The file grew enormous.
But they were facing immediate challenges, weren't they?
Significant ones, right from the start. One major issue was the lack of useful CCTV footage. Gowan Avenue itself, back in 1999, had very little surveillance. Cameras weren't everywhere like they are today.
So no clear video of the killer arriving or leaving.
Frustratingly, no. There were snippets from wider areas, but nothing capturing the crucial moments on Gowan Avenue itself. Eyewitness accounts were also inconsistent or vague. Some people reported seeing a man walking quickly away from the scene around the time of the murder.
Any consistent description?
Not really. Descriptions varied. White man, maybe in his late 30s or 40s. Some said wearing a dark suit or coat, maybe carrying something. But nothing concrete enough to generate a strong suspect composite. It was all fleeting glimpses, if that. This lack of a clear visual was a massive handicap.
And then there was the motive problem you mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge of all.
Absolutely, the core enigma. Police were baffled. They dug deep into Jill's life, professional connections, personal relationships, finances. Nothing. No spurned lover, no evidence of blackmail, no gambling debts, no grudges that could explain such a ruthless killing.
It's just nothing.
Nothing solid. This complete vacuum, this lack of a why, made it incredibly difficult for detectives. Normally, motive helps narrow the field. Here, the field was wide open, forcing them to consider less conventional possibilities almost immediately.
Like what? What were the initial theories floating around within the investigation?
Well, given the lack of personal motive, they had to look outwards. One early theory was a stalker, someone obsessed with her public persona who had somehow escalated to extreme violence.
Plausible, given her fame.
Plausible, yes. Stalking was and is a serious issue for public figures. Another major line of inquiry, inevitably, was the Crime Watch connection. Could it be revenge?
Someone she'd helped put away. Or maybe angered through one of the appeals.
Exactly. A hardened criminal, or maybe associates of one, seeking retaliation for a conviction stemming from a Crime Watch feature. The professional nature of the hit lent some weight to that it suggested someone with criminal connections, perhaps. But again, linking it to a specific case or criminal proved impossible.
So lots of possibilities, but nothing concrete was sticking.
Not in those early stages, no. It was a frustrating, painstaking process of elimination, chasing down hundreds, thousands of potential leads, most of which led absolutely nowhere. The pressure was immense, the public wanted answers, and the police were struggling to find them.
And it was in that context, after more than a year of searching, that they finally made an arrest. This is where Barry George enters the picture, isn't it?
Yes. In May 2000, over a year after the murder, the focus shifted significantly onto Barry George. He was arrested and later charged.
Who was he? And why did he become the prime suspect?
Barry George, also known as Barry Bulsara, was a local man. He lived just about half a mile, maybe less, from Jill Dando's house on Gowan Avenue.
Very close proximity then.
Extremely close. And he had a history that immediately caught the police's attention, particularly aligning with that obsessed stalker theory. He had previous convictions, including one for attempted rape back in the early 80s. He also had a documented history of stalking women, using false identities, and generally displaying obsessive and sometimes erratic attention-seeking behavior.
Okay, so the profile seemed to fit, at least superficially, one of the angles they were considering.
It did. He reportedly had collections of newspapers featuring photos of local women, and some neighbors described him as a loner, someone who kept odd hours. Police started building a case around him, believing he might have developed an obsession with Jill Dando, his famous neighbor.
And this led to his conviction.
Yes, in July 2001, after an 8-week trial at the Old Bailey, Barry George was found guilty of Jill Dando's murder by a majority verdict and sentenced to life imprisonment. It seemed for a time that the mystery was solved.
But the conviction was controversial from the start, largely because of the evidence used against him, right?
Hugely controversial. The prosecution's case was almost entirely circumstantial, except for one piece of forensic evidence that became absolutely critical.
A gunshot residue.
Exactly. A single microscopic particle of firearm discharge residue, or FDR, was found inside the pocket of a dark blue Cecil G coat seized from Barry George's flat about a year after the murder.
One particle.
One single particle. The prosecution argued this particle was of the same type as residue expected from the ammunition likely used in the murder weapon, and its presence linked George directly to the shooting. They presented it as strong evidence he was either the gunman or had been in very close proximity when the gun was fired.
But his defense contested this strongly.
Vigorously. They argued that one particle was simply not enough. It could have got there through secondary contamination, maybe he brushed against someone, or it came from the police handling the coat, or it was simply present in the environment. The science around single particle FDR analysis was, and still is, complex and debated.
Fascinating. So the very foundation of the conviction rested on this incredibly tiny, contested piece of evidence. And that foundation eventually crumbled.
It did. Barry George and his legal team always maintained his innocence and appealed the conviction multiple times. The key breakthrough came years later.
What happened?
Well, scientific understanding evolved, and the interpretation of that single particle came under renewed scrutiny. Concerns grew about the reliability of associating one microscopic particle definitively with the firing of the specific murder weapon, especially when found so long after the event and with potential contamination roads.
So the Court of Appeal took another look.
Yes. In 2007, the Court of Appeal heard fresh arguments, particularly focusing on new expert opinions that cast serious doubt on the significance of that single particle. They concluded that the forensic evidence was no longer considered safe or reliable enough to uphold the conviction.
So they quashed the conviction.
They did. They quashed the original conviction and ordered a retrial. The judgment basically said that if the jury had heard the current scientific understanding about the potential insignificance of that single particle back in 2001, the verdict might well have been different.
And the retrial.
The retrial took place in 2008. This time, the prosecution could not rely heavily on the gunshot residue evidence. Its value had been significantly downgraded. Without that key forensic link, the case against George was much weaker, relying more on his character and proximity.
And the outcome.
He was acquitted. After a second trial, the jury found Barry George not guilty of Jill Dando's murder. He walked free after serving 8 years in prison.
Wow. So from solved crime to wrongful conviction to officially unsolved again.
Precisely. It was a seismic shift. It meant the UK's most high-profile murder case in decades was back to square one. It also shone a really harsh light on the potential pitfalls of relying on complex forensic science, especially when presented as definitive proof, and the immense pressure investigations face in such public cases.
A miscarriage of justice, as many called it. And it left the central question wide open once more.
Absolutely. Who killed Jill Dando? If it wasn't Barry George, then who was it? And the investigation, while technically still open, had lost years focusing on him. Leads had gone cold. The trail was effectively frozen.
So over 2 decades on, Barry George acquitted, no other charges ever brought.
Yeah.
What's the official status now? Still just unsolved.
Officially unsolved. That's the stark reality. It remains one of the UK's most prominent cold cases. The Metropolitan Police say the case is periodically reviewed, but unless significant new information or evidence emerges, active investigation is minimal.
And the legacy of that investigation is quite tarnished, isn't it?
It is. The case is often cited as a cautionary tale. The reliance on that flawed forensic evidence, the potential tunnel vision that led to focusing so heavily on George, it all contributed to a situation where not only was an innocent man potentially in prison, but the real killer, assuming it wasn't George, remained free.
And the lack of motive remains the stumbling block.
It's the fundamental problem. Without understanding why she was killed, it's incredibly hard to identify who might have done it. That absence of a typical motive in, like, jealousy, money, revenge from a known enemy leaves investigators grappling with possibilities that are much harder to prove.
Add the missing weapon, the
Yeah.
limited CCTV. It seems like a perfect storm of investigative challenges.
It really was. No murder weapon means no ballistics to potentially match later. No DNA from the killer on the weapon. Limited CCTV means no clear visual identification. Vague eyewitnesses. It created a situation where hard, incontrovertible evidence was just desperately lacking. It's a testament to how some cases, even with massive resources thrown at them, can remain stubbornly elusive. For Jill's family, friends, colleagues, it means no closure, just endless questions.
And into that void of official answers, as we mentioned, step the public, the internet, the speculators. With no definitive solution, people try to construct their own. Let's walk through some of the main theories that have persisted.
Yes, when the official narrative collapses or remains incomplete, alternative narratives inevitably emerge, and the Dando case has generated some really enduring ones.
The first one, linked to Barry George, was the obsessed fan stalker theory. Even with his acquittal, does that idea still hold any water for some?
Well, the theory itself persists, even if not specifically attached to George by everyone. The idea is that someone, perhaps unknown, developed an unhealthy fixation on Jill Dando due to her fame and public profile, and that this obsession escalated tragically.
What supports that idea, generally?
The main support is simply the context of celebrity. Famous people do attract stalkers, sometimes dangerous ones, and because no other motive seemed obvious, the idea of a lone, disturbed individual acting out of fantasy or delusion offered a potential, albeit frightening, explanation. George's proximity and history initially seemed to fit this mold perfectly, which is why the police pursued it.
But the critiques are pretty strong now.
Very strong. Firstly, George's acquittal seriously undermines the only suspect ever directly linked to this theory. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the method of the killing. That precise execution style shot feels very different from the often more chaotic or frenzied violence associated with crimes of passion or delusion carried out by lone stalkers. It felt professional, controlled. That dissonance makes the lone stalker theory harder to sustain for many analysts.
Okay, moving away from the lone individual, what about the underworld connection? The organized crime or crime watch revenge theory?
This one has always had a strong pull, largely because of her work. The theory is straightforward. Jill Dando, through presenting Crime Watch, helped bring serious criminals to justice. Therefore, one of those criminals or their associates orchestrated her murder as revenge.
The logic seems plausible on the surface.
It does. And again, the professional nature of the killing fits the profile of a potential contract hit ordered by someone within the criminal underworld. Someone who wanted to send a message, perhaps, or simply eliminate someone they saw as responsible for their incarceration or disruption of their activities.
But the police investigated this thoroughly, didn't they?
Extensively.
Yeah.
Operation Oxborough spent a huge amount of time looking into criminals featured on Crime Watch, investigating potential threats, exploring links between known organized crime figures and Jill Dando.
And found.
Nothing concrete, no credible link was ever established between any specific criminal or gang and her murder. There were rumors, whispers, theories about specific gangsters, but never any solid evidence. Jill herself had apparently never reported any serious threats related to her Crime Watch work. So while it feels like it could fit, the evidential trail just isn't there.
Right. Which brings us to perhaps the most talked about and maybe unsettling theory, the Serbian hitman theory. This one connects her death to international politics.
Yes, this theory emerged quite quickly and has remained incredibly persistent. It links Jill Dando's murder directly to the Kosovo War, which was raging in the spring of 1999.
Explain the connection.
The timing is key. Jill Dando was murdered on April 26th. Just 3 days earlier, on April 23rd, NATO forces bombed the headquarters of RTS, the Serbian state broadcaster, in Belgrade, killing 16 employees. NATO claimed RTS was a legitimate target as part of Slobodan Milojevic's propaganda machine.
Okay.
Additionally, Jill Dando had recently fronted a BBC appeal for aid for Kosovan Albanian refugees fleeing the conflict. The theory posits that her murder was a direct act of retaliation for the RTS bombing and perceived anti-Serb sentiment in the British media, possibly ordered by Serbian intelligence, paramilitaries, or even Milojevic himself.
Retaliation by killing a high-profile BBC presenter.
Exactly, a symbolic act. The target wasn't random, it was chosen for maximum impact. The professional, execution-style killing method also seemed to fit the profile of state-sponsored or paramilitary assassins. The name of the Serbian warlord Arkan, Jutko Rašatović, was often mentioned in connection with this, though purely speculatively. He himself was assassinated in 2000.
It's a chillingly plausible narrative in some ways. The timing is undeniable.
The timing is the strongest element supporting it. It feels almost too coincidental for some. However, like the Crime Watch theory, it suffers from a complete lack of concrete evidence. No intelligence agency has ever confirmed such a plot. No individual has ever been identified or charged. No credible claim of responsibility has ever emerged from Serbian sources.
So it remains speculation, albeit powerful speculation.
Precisely. It's fueled by the geopolitical context, the method of the killing, and the lack of any other convincing motive. But without proof, it's just a theory, a compelling one, but unverified.
And inevitably, in cases like this, you get the deeper MI5, MI6 conspiracy theories. The idea that British intelligence was somehow involved.
Ah, yes, that's almost a standard feature of major unsolved mysteries, isn't it? The idea that the state did it. These theories are usually quite vague. They suggest Jill Dando was silenced by MI5 or MI6 because she had stumbled onto some dangerous secret.
A kind of secret.
It's never clearly defined.
Right.
Maybe something about government corruption, illegal arms deals, links between establishment figures and organized crime. Maybe something related to the royal family. The speculation is often quite wild. Or perhaps she was involved in some kind of intelligence operation herself that went wrong. The professional nature of the hit is often cited as proof that only state actors could have carried it out so cleanly.
But the basis for this is
Extremely thin to non-existent. There's absolutely no credible evidence to suggest Jill Dando was involved in espionage or had uncovered sensitive state secrets. It really falls into the realm of pure conjecture, driven by a general distrust of authority and the appeal of hidden, complex explanations for shocking events. It's more about the mindset of the theorist than about any factual basis related to Jill Dando herself.
okay, and finally, the theory that maybe offers the least comfort, a completely random act of violence.
This theory suggests the killer had no prior connection to Jill Dando at all. It was just a chance encounter, maybe a mugging that escalated instantly to murder, or simply an act of motiveless random violence by a stranger.
Why is this generally dismissed?
Primarily because of the execution-style nature of the crime. Random attacks, even fatal ones, rarely exhibit that level of precision and control of a single shot. Pressed to the temple, no struggle, no theft, quick escape, weapon never found. It feels targeted, planned, not impulsive or opportunistic. While you can never entirely rule out randomness, the specific characteristics of this murder argue strongly against it being a simple, spontaneous act by a stranger.
It's fascinating how the media narrative around her, the Golden Girl image, really shaped how all these theories were received and discussed. That narrative amplified everything, didn't it?
Absolutely. Her universally positive public image, the lack of any scandal, made her murder seem even more inexplicable, more shocking. It wasn't just a murder, it was the murder of someone perceived as embodying decency and trustworthiness. This turned it into what felt like an impossible crime.
Which makes people search harder for extraordinary explanations.
Exactly. When the victim seems so far removed from the kind of world where contract killings, where brutal assassinations happen, it fuels speculation about hidden depths, conspiracies, or extraordinary motives. The public's affection for her amplified the sense of national trauma and the desperate need for answers. And when the justice system seemingly failed with the wrongful conviction and acquittal, it left that need completely unfulfilled, creating this perfect storm for enduring mystery and speculation. The media reflected and amplified this public fascination, constantly revisiting the case, keeping those theories alive. It became a story that refused to end.
It really is such a tangled web. Conflicting theories, discredited evidence, so many unanswered questions. When you try to step back and assess the plausibility of what stands out.
Well, the method, as we kept saying, is key. That professional execution really does push you away from the random act or the lone, disorganized stalker theories, generally speaking. It points towards planning, intent, and perhaps experience.
Which lends more weight to theories involving organized elements.
Potentially, yes. Whether that's organized crime, crime watch revenge, or, more controversially, state-linked actors, the Serbian theory. The Barry George situation, however, is a crucial counterpoint. It shows how easily investigators, under immense pressure, could seize upon circumstantial evidence and a profile that seemed to fit, even if the method didn't quite align. It proves that seemingly logical connections can be misleading.
So the Serbian theory remains compelling purely based on timing and method, even without proof.
It resonates because it offers a coherent, albeit unproven narrative that accounts for both the why, retaliation, and the how, professional hit, in a way few other theories do as neatly. But resonance isn't evidence. The crime watch theory also has that internal logic, but the police drew a blank trying to connect it to specifics.
And the conspiracy theories remain just that.
Pretty much. Without any shred of concrete evidence linking Jill Dando to state secrets or intelligence operations, they remain firmly in the realm of speculation, feeding off the mystery rather than explaining it.
So why? After all this time, all the resources, why is it still unsolved? What are the fundamental roadblocks?
I think it boils down to a few critical factors. Firstly, the profound impact of that flawed initial investigation focusing on Barry George. Relying on that unreliable forensic evidence cost precious time, potentially allowed the real trail to go cold, and ultimately led to an acquittal, leaving the police back at square 1 year later.
The damage from the misdirected focus was significant.
Immense. Secondly, that persistent, crucial lack of a clear, provable motive. Without the why, finding the who becomes exponentially harder. Conventional detective work often relies on understanding motive to narrow down suspects. Here, that anchor was missing.
And the physical evidence or lack thereof.
Absolutely critical. No murder weapon is a massive blow. No DNA evidence linking someone else to the scene. No definitive CCTV. Those fundamental building blocks of a modern murder conviction were simply absent.
And maybe the initial confusion and pressure played a role.
Very likely. In such a high-profile, shocking case, the pressure for immediate answers is enormous. This can sometimes lead to confirmation bias, overlooking contradictory evidence, or perhaps not exploring all avenues with equal rigor in those crucial early days and weeks. It was a perfect storm of difficulty.
Looking beyond the specifics of the case, what wider lessons or implications can we draw from the Jill Dando story? It feels like it touched on so many sensitive issues.
It really did. On one level, it starkly highlighted the vulnerability of public figures. Even someone as beloved and seemingly uncontroversial as Jill Dando could be targeted so brutally right on our own doorstep. It raised uncomfortable questions about celebrity, privacy, and security that still resonate today.
The idea that fame itself could make you a target regardless of your actions.
Potentially, yes. or that your public role, even one aimed at doing good like Crime Watch, could have unforeseen fatal consequences. It also served as a very public, very painful example of how the justice system can fail.
The miscarriage of justice aspect.
Exactly. Barry George's conviction and eventual acquittal is a sobering reminder of the fallibility of the system, the potential for unreliable evidence to lead to wrongful imprisonment, and the devastating impact this has on individuals and public confidence. It underscores the immense responsibility that comes with forensic science and its presentation in court.
And it speaks to our collective fascination with mystery, doesn't it?
Definitely. It shows the enduring power of narrative, especially an unsolved one involving a beloved figure. The Dando case became more than just a crime statistic. It became a national story, a puzzle that people felt compelled to try and solve. The public's and the media's refusal to let it go, the constant revisiting of theories, shows how deeply an unresolved, impossible crime can embed itself in the collective psyche. We crave closure, we crave explanations, and this case offers neither.
So, the murder of Jill Dando. It really does remain this profound and disturbing mystery. A household name, assassinated in broad daylight, leaving behind a tangled mess of theories, a flawed investigation, a grieving family still without answers, and a sense that justice somehow wasn't fully served.
It's a case where the lack of a definitive answer is almost as significant as the crime itself. It forces us to confront the limits of investigation, the fallibility of justice, and our own need to make sense of the senseless.
Was it a stalker? A contract killer linked to Crime Watch? A Serbian hit squad? Or something else entirely hidden from view? The threads are there, but pulling the right one remains elusive. What do you, listening now, believe is the most plausible explanation, or perhaps the most overlooked clue? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Join the conversation on our social media platforms using hashtag ThreadsOffTruth and hashtag Jill Dando. Next time on Threads of Truth, we'll explore the eerie disappearance of the Springfield three women who vanished without a trace from a quiet Missouri home in 1992. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review for Threads of Truth wherever you listen. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these unsolved cases and search for the truth, one thread at a time.